I'll be reading Church History in Plain Language by Bruce Shelley. Chapter 17. Bending the Necks of Victors. Mission to the Barbarians. The bristling forests of northern Europe were inhabited by barbarian tribes who sacrificed animals and worshipped nature spirits among the trees and beside the streams. Any missionary who ventured among them, with any hope of converting them, had to demonstrate the superior power of the Christian spirits. The most famous incident tells of one 8th century missionary named Boniface, who marched into a shrine in Germany and the sacred forest of Thor, the god of thunder. The cult object was a massive oak. Boniface, so the story goes, took an axe to it. Just as he leveled the first stroke, a mighty breath of wind from God toppled the tree. That'd be kind of cool, actually, to see. The pagans marveled and were converted. Boniface used the wood to build a chapel to St. Peter. That is the stuff that made Europe Christian. The missionary monks overthrew barbarian magic by calling down superior powers. God blew and the tree fell. A miracle here and a victorious battle there, and the Germans were ready for baptism. The point is, Christianity faced a new and enormous challenge when the German tribes swept across the Rhine of the Danube frontier and left the once mighty empire of the Romans in shambles. The civilization that arose on those ruins was Christian in character because the invaders surrendered not their arms but their gods. How did the barbarians come to accept the chapel dedicated to St. Peter, where the sacred oak of Thor once stood? Why did the Germans come to worship the god of their defeated foes? The coming of the barbarians is the section. The year 476 usually marks the end of the Christian Roman Empire in the West. That is the year the long line of emperors inaugurated by Augustine ended and the undistinguished rule by the German leaders began. The event was about as unspectacular as events can be. The mercenary soldiers wielded the real power in the name of the emperor were mainly German. Germans were killing Germans. In 475, Orestes, the barbarian commander of the imperial troops, forced the Senate to elect his young son Romulus Augustulus, Little Augustus, as emperor in the West. In the following year, however, another Germanic commander, Odovacar, slew Orestes, and seeing no reason for continuing the sham of an imperial line, deposed Romulus Augustulus and proclaimed himself head of the government. That was it. No one was particularly shocked. That had all come a generation earlier with Alaric and Gesseric and Attila. Who were these new masters of Europe? The Romans had called them barbarians because during early contact with the Romans, they spoke no Greek and no Latin. But for the most part, they were tribes from the north, originally in or near Scandinavia. Vandals, Franks, Angles, Saxons, Goths, Lombards, Burgundians, and others. When they started to give the Romans problems in the 3rd century, they were at a cultural stage midway between a pastoral and agricultural economy. They engaged in so little commerce that cattle, rather than money, marked the wealthy and the powerful among them. According to the Roman historian Tacitus, the Germans were notoriously heavy drinkers and gamblers. On the other hand, Tacitus praised their courage, respect for women, and freedom from many Roman vices. A favorite amusement was listening to the tribal bards recite ancient tales of heroes and gods. Today, the tales are long lost, but we retain Thor's day on our Thursday and another god named Woden in our Wednesday. The Germans lived to fight. Every warlord had a retinue of warriors linked to their leader by a personal oath of loyalty. According to Tacitus, any warrior leaving a battle alive after his chief had fallen was consigned to lifelong infamy. The chiefs fight for victory and the companions of their chief. That's in quotations. It says, the chiefs fight for victory, the companions for their chief. During the centuries that the Romans and Germans faced each other across the Rhine-Danube frontier, they had countless contacts with each other, peaceful as well as hostile. Roman trade reached into Germany, and Germans entered the empire as slaves. During the troubled 3rd century, many barbarians were invited to settle on vacated lands within the empire or to serve in the Roman legions. By the end of the 4th century, the Roman army and its generals in the west had become almost completely German. We have a map. Invasion of the Western Empire by Germans. Here it is, folks. Okay. The crisis of mass invasion came with the sudden appearance of new uncontrollable force, the Huns. Late in the 4th century, this wave soon subjugated the easternmost Germanic tribe, the Ostrogoths. Terrified at the prospect of conquest by the advancing Huns, the Visigoths or Westgoths petitioned the Romans to allow them to settle as allies inside the empire. Rome granted the request, and in 376, the entire tribe crossed the Danube into Roman territory. Shortly, however, corrupt Roman officials mistreated the Visigoths, and the proud barbarians went on a rampage. The inept Eastern Emperor Valens tried to quell them, but in 378 he lost both his army and his life in the Battle of Adrianople. I wonder if it's pronounced Nople. Probably like Constantinople, so probably Adrianople. I'm going to go with that. In today's Turkey. It says in parentheses, in today's Turkey. Some historians regard Adrianople as one of history's decisive battles. It destroyed the legend of the invincibility of the Roman legions and ushered in a century and a half of chaos. For a few years, the able Emperor Theodosius I held back the Visigoths, but after his death in 395, they began to migrate and pillage under their leader, Alaric. He invaded Italy, and in 410 his followers sacked Rome. To counter Alaric's threat to Italy, the Romans had withdrawn most of their troops from the Rhine frontier in 406 and from Britain the following year. The momentous consequence of this action was a flood of Germanic tribes across the defenseless frontier. The Vandals pushed their way through Gaul into Spain, and after pressure from the Visigoths, moved on to Africa. In 455, a Vandal raiding force sailed over from Africa, and Rome was sacked a second time. Meanwhile, the Burgundians settled in the Rhone Valley, and Franks gradually spread across northern Gaul. And the Angles, Saxons, and Jutes invaded Britain. Although each of these tribes set up a German-ruled kingdom within the confines of the empire, only the Franks in Gaul. Whenever I read Frank, I wonder if, like, men who are called Frank are, I don't know. Anyway, only the Franks in Gaul and the Angles and Saxons in Britain managed to perpetuate their kingdoms longer than a few centuries. Today, we can see that the Germanic invasions were not as cataclysmic as once thought. The invaders seized a great deal of land, but most of this was either vacant or belonged to the emperors. Few private landowners were displaced. In most areas, the Germans still presented a minority of the population, and a gradual blend and fusing of the cultures and the blood of the two peoples began. Thus, the barbarians, in time, lost their Germanic customs, religion, and speech. This is why hardly a trace of Germanic languages remain in Italy, France, and Spain. And now we're at a section called Missions to the North. Okay, the task of converting these northern peoples was enormous. To bring them to a nominal adherence to Christianity was not so difficult because they wanted to enter into the grandeur that was Rome. Christianity was, in their eyes, the Roman religion. But to tame, refine, and educate these barbarians, is it going to say barbarians? Nope, it just says peoples. But to tame and refine and educate these, I was hoping it would say barbarians, these peoples, to transmit to them the best of the culture of antiquity, to teach them the Christian creed, and above all, to instill in them even a modicum of Christian behavior. All that was another matter. The barbarians were brought to Orthodox Christianity in two ways: directly from paganism and indirectly through Arianism, a heresy that denied the eternality of Jesus Christ as the Son of God. Arius' doctrine spread among them from the time in the 4th century when Arianism was strong in the empire. This Arianism, however, was more ecclesiastical than theological because the Germans were not interested in the niceties of abstract theology. Their Christ was the firstborn creature. They tended to think of him as a glorified warlord. But the main difference between the Arians and the Orthodox in the West lay in the structure of the church. The Arians had no ecclesiastical center. They did not recognize Orthodox Rome, and they had no counterparts of their own. I lost my spot. Sorry, folks. Okay. Did not, blah, blah, blah. Their church. Got you. Okay, found it. Their churches belonged to the clan. The clan. Arian. Sorry, I'm gonna stop it. Even after the conversion of these Arian Germans to Orthodoxy, they were still loath to accept centralized church authority through Rome. The Arian influence apparently began with missionary work among the Visigoths. A half century after the Council of Nicaea in 325, a missionary named Ulfilas or Wulfila crossed the Danube to work among them for 40 years. Aided by other unknown missionaries, Ulfilas led them to faith in Christ as Arius had preached him. That's kind of weird. Let me reread that sentence. I think I might have missed something. Aided by other unknown missionaries, Ulfilas led them to faith in Christ as Arius had preached him. I think it's missing a word, but okay. This conversion of the Goths must have been something more than surrender to social pressures. We know that Ulfilas translated the Bible into the Gothic language with the exception of the books of Kings, which he thought too bellicose to be edifying for a people already extremely fierce and warlike. That's kind of funny. From the Goths, then, Arian Christianity spread to other Germanic tribes. Some of the earliest northern peoples to come to Christ were beyond the borders of the empire and were not themselves German. The Irish were Celtic people, and their conversion is traced to Patrick early in the 5th century. From his brief autobiography, we learn that when the Roman legions were withdrawn for the defense of the continent, the Irish, then called Scots, began swooping down on the English coast, sailing up the rivers, raiding the settlements, and carrying off plunder and slaves. Among the captives was Patrick. So, Ireland's patron saint was not Irish. He had been reared a Christian. His father was a deacon, but Patrick's religion sat lightly until, as a slave swineherd, he prayed ardently for his freedom. His conversion dates from this captivity. The Lord opened to me the sense of my unbelief, he said. After 6 years, he managed to escape and found his way to the coast, where a ship carrying a cargo of hounds was about to sail to France or Scotland. We don't know which. Stories about his trips to France may be sheer fancy, but we do know that he was eager to see his family and after many hardships reached home once again. He would have gladly remained in England had he not had a dream one night in which the babies of Ireland pleaded with him to come back, like actual babies. Kind of weird. This dream sounds weird. Okay, he would have gladly remained in England had he not had a dream one night in which the babies of Ireland pleaded with him to come back to their country and tell them about Christ. Patrick decided to return, but first he had to learn more about Christianity. At length, he was sent out, some say with the approval of the Pope, to be a missionary to the people among whom he had once been a slave. At this point, his account ends, and from then on, we have only legends. We know, however, that a century later, the structure of the church in Ireland was predominantly monastic. Presumably, the monastic community maintaining itself on the land fitted the agricultural communities of the Celts better than the parish church system so common in the Roman Empire. We also know that Ireland became the base for the evangelization of Britain. The Irish have a habit of leaving Ireland, and the missionary monks were no exception. As we have seen, there were Christian churches in Britain before Patrick's day, but a century after Patrick's time, an Irish monk named Columba led in the founding of a monastery on Iona, I think it's Iona, an island off the coast of Scotland. Iona, I'm going to say Iona because I actually think it's that. Iona, in turn, gave a new and vital impulse to the preaching of Christ in Britain. Surprisingly, Celtic monks from Ireland and Britain also became missionaries to the continent. Their itching feet carried them farther and farther from home. They established monasteries in Germany and Switzerland, and even in northern Italy. These became the centers of evangelization. These became the centers of evangelization and devout learning. Columbanus is the great name in this mission, though he was only one among many, and St. Gall and Hobio were two of the most famous Celtic monasteries. These were the days before the bishops of Rome gained central recognition as popes, so this Celtic influence is on the continent, and the independent spirit of the Irish and British monks became in time a disturbing factor to Roman Christianity. Now we're at a section called The Gospel Among the Franks. Roman Catholic influence began in the northern half of Gaul among the Franks, though one tribe destined to greatness in the shaping of Christianity. And that's not quite right. It's got more to the sentence. Roman Catholic influence began in the northern half of Gaul among the Franks, the one tribe destined to greatness in the shaping of Christian Europe. The founder of the nation was Clovis, who was the first barbarian chief of any importance to convert to Orthodox Christianity. It happened that he was married to a Burgundy princess who was a Christian. Clotilda often spoke to Clovis about the one God who created heaven and earth out of nothing and had fashioned man. Clovis replied, "Nonsense." But when their first son was born, he allowed the child to be baptized. The babe died in his baptismal robes. Clovis blamed the baptism, but Clotilda rejoiced that God had taken the soul directly to heaven, to eternal bliss. Another son was born, baptized, and fell sick. Clovis claimed that baptism would kill him too, but the mother prayed and he recovered. Then in a battle with the Alemanni tribe, Clovis was on the verge of being routed. He cried, "Jesus Christ." Clotilda says, "Thou art the Son of the living God, and thou canst give victory to those who hope in thee. Give me victory, and I will be baptized. I have tried my gods, and they have deserted me. I call on thee. Only save me." The king of the Alemanni fell, and his army fled. Clovis returned and told Clotilda. She summoned the bishop of Reims, who exhorted the king to renounce his gods. "Yes, Holy Father," said Clovis, "but my people will not consent. However, I will speak to them." He did, and with one accord they renounced their German gods. The baptistry was hung with trapeze the baptistry was hung with tapestries. Aromatic candles flared. The aroma of incense filled the shrine with fragrance, so that many thought they were amid the odors of paradise. Clovis advanced like another Constantine to the baptismal front, and the bishop said, "Bend your neck. Worship what you burn, and burn what you worshipped." Thus, the king was baptized in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. 3,000 of his army followed him in baptism. That's like a lot of people. I mean, I think they, probably weren't all, necessarily sincere, but still cool. This first of many mass conversions during the Middle Ages raises important questions about the paganizing of Christianity. Missions can proceed in two ways. One is the way of individual conversion with a period of instruction prior to baptism. In general, this is the method used by Protestant missions under the evangelical movements of the 19th century, with their emphasis on individual change of heart. The disadvantage of this method is that the Christian converts in a pagan culture. Become, by reason of their change in faith, uprooted from their own culture and compelled to move into an alien enclave. The other method is mass conversion, and it was this method that converted Europe. Kings like Clovis embraced the faith, and their people followed them into the spiritual city as into the earthly. This meant that individuals were not uprooted from their culture, but it also meant that the converts brought with them into the church their superstitions and behavior. This is evident in many instances, starting with Clovis himself. Jesus was for him a tribal war god. The Franks especially admired St. Peter, whose noblest exploit in their eyes was his eagerness to wield his sword to protect the Lord Jesus and to slice off the ear of the high priest's servant. This admiration for militant religion is also reflected by St. George, a military saint who became the patron of England, and St. James, the patron saint of Christian Spain, is the struggle against Islam. The saints with their particular assignments may well have meant more to the people than Christ himself. St. Anthony took care of pigs. St. Gall looked after their hens. This is like paganism. Saint Apollonia, whose jaw had been broken in the persecution, cured toothache. Saint Geneva cured fever. And Saint Blaise was responsible for sore throats. For almost every human need, these tenuously converted Germans could find a saint. Many tales circulated about the miraculous powers of the saints. The story was told of two beggars, one lame, the other blind. They happened to be caught in a procession carrying the relics of Saint Martin and were fearful lest they be cured and so deprived of their alms. The one who could see but not walk mounted the shoulders of the one who could walk but not see, and they hurried to get beyond the range of the saints' miraculous powers. But poor fellows, they failed to make it. This is so ridiculous. And now we're at another section. The passage to England. In spite of the shallow impact of the gospel among the Franks, their conversion did provide a passage through Gaul to Great Britain. The initiative for the conversion of England came from Rome. In 596, Pope Gregory the Great sent a party of Benedictine monks to distant and barbaric England under the leadership of Augustine, another Saint Augustine, who would become known as Saint Augustine of Canterbury. Augustine and his monks began their ministry in Kent, one of the 12 areas controlled by the Anglo-Saxons, who had recently invaded and conquered much of England. Under the favor of Queen Bertha, another of those Christian queens eager to convert a pagan husband, Augustine secured a hearing from King Ethelbert, but only out of doors, where Augustine supposedly would be less able to exercise his magical powers. Rumor had it that he was able to make tails grow on the backs of those who displeased him. The king was so persuaded by Augustine that he granted land for the foundation of a monastery at Canterbury, ever after to be the seat of the English religious leader. Gregory appointed Augustine the first Archbishop of Canterbury. There's a picture of it. It says here, shown here are the remains of the monastery at Canterbury given to St. Augustine by King Ethelbert. And here it is. Okay. The missionaries who followed Augustine worked farther north. By the time of King Oswy in the late 7th century, the two missionary thrusts converged. Celtic followers of Columba worked toward the south, and those of Augustine toward the north. Oswy's queen was from the south and followed the Roman practices, but Oswy had received his Christian beliefs from the north and observed the Celtic way. Among the points of dispute was the date for Easter. When the king had ended Lent and was keeping Easter, the queen and her household were still fasting, enough to ruin any family's Easter. At the Synod of Whitby in 664, Oswy brought the matter to a decision. The Celtic advocate appealed to the authority of Columba, the Romans to that of Peter, to whom Christ gave the keys. Is that really so? Does Peter guard the gates of heaven? Oswy asked the Celtic defender. He, of course, agreed. Oswy promptly resolved to take no chances of alienating the doorkeeper of heaven. He agreed to follow Roman practices. After Whitby, the British Isles moved relentlessly into the orbit of Rome. Once securely rooted in the Anglo-Saxon England, Christianity returned in fresh vigor to the continent. The most famous British missionary of the Middle Ages was Winfrid, better known as Boniface. Born in Devonshire, Boniface was commissioned by Pope Gregory II in 729 9 to evangelize Germany. His primary task was to convert the pagan population, and in this he had great success. Besides that, however, he brought the British and Irish missionary monks and their converts into closer relations with the Bishop of Rome. Boniface was deeply devoted to the cause. Not only could he chop down a sacred tree while the shuddering multitude watched to see him struck dead by fire from heaven, but he also could win the masses to the faith and organize the districts in which he exercised his power so as to leave behind him a church structure bound firmly to the central authority at Rome. Boniface became Archbishop of Mainz and would have ended his splendid career there in peace if final qualms about the failure of his early efforts in Frisia, the Netherlands, had not drawn him back to that still pagan field. There he sealed his faith with martyrdom. If that was in the year 754, as is generally supposed, the young Frankish prince Charles, who was destined to become emperor, Charlemagne, and architect of the new Christian Europe, was 12 years old at the time. Okay, that concludes this chapter, and the next chapter, well, actually, we'll be going into like a new section next time, the Christian Middle Ages, and that would be from 590 to 15